friend. We are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future. You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here. And now, for the first time, we are bringing to you the full story of what happened on that fateful day.
Have any of you ever heard of a movie called Plan 9 from Outer Space?
No.
No.
Not at all.
Never.
What's it about?
It is about the resurrection of the dead.
Not my type of movie.
Nah.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Would you agree to be interviewed about Plan 9 from Outer Space?
No, well, I won't complain.
Have you ever heard of a film called Plan 9 from Outer Space?
No, I never heard because I never go to the movies.
We were having a video party. A couple friends of mine were UCLA students, and there was starting to be a buzz about this movie that was the worst movie ever made.
Suppose that saucer or whatever it was had something to do with this?
Your guess is as good as mine, Larry. One thing's sure. Inspector Clay's dead. Murdered. And somebody's responsible.
We're on the streets of fabulous Hollywood with John, the district manager of Pacific Theaters, and he has seen
Plan 9 from Outer Space, with the main character being a gorilla suit with a scuba diving helmet on.
John, I think you've got that mixed up with Robot Monster.
Oh, Robot Monster, right.
In addition to the reputation that Plan 9 has as being just sort of a crazy, nutty, bad movie, there are some legitimately effective shots in the picture. That famous bit where a vampire is coming at you with her hands, you know, I mean, that actually was a very haunting shot.
Ed Wood makes films like, or made films like no other.
Ed Wood.
Because Ed Wood was, bless his heart, an auteur. And if there ever was one, you'll never mistake a bad movie made by anybody else for one made by Ed Wood.
I never felt that Plan 9 was the worst movie ever made. I think that either The Creeping Terror or Gone with the Wind.
One night, and this isn't a sexual thing, I was lying in bed and Ed came, I felt his spirit, into my room, and he began to dance for me. But he didn't dance with the dress on. He danced as a satyr. And it appeared to me that his feet became these little hooves. And he was Ed Wood, all with the satyr, you know, below the belt, and above, he was like a beautiful Apollo.
People turning south from the freeway were startled when they saw 3 flying saucers high over Hollywood Boulevard. My friend, can your heart stand the shocking facts about Plan 9? Punish the guilty.
Your stupid minds! Stupid! Stupid!
Reward the innocent.
I'm a big boy now, Johnny.
Can you prove that it didn't happen?
Paddy Woods in outer space. Art or mistake. Plan 9 decide.
Oh yes, Plan 9 deals with
saucers seen over Hollywood. The
dead, brought to a simulated life by our electrode guns.
Flying saucers seen over Washington, D.C.
You mean the kind from up there?
Inspector Clay, hero. Down the dead old man. Tragic. His dead wife.
Army brand. No, its counterpart.
The Solarite.
Solarite. The Solarite. The Solarite.
The Solarite.
I'm standing under the marquee of the landmark Vista Theater in Hollywood. It was on this block that D.W. Griffith filmed Intolerance. And it was just around the corner here, at the only place in Los Angeles where Hollywood and Sunset Boulevards intersect, that a young would-be filmmaker named Edward D. Wood, Jr. began renting an office apartment. The year was 1947. Wood had just formed a production company with a partner to produce commercials for early television.
Wood Thomas Productions. It was listed in the Studio Blue Book at that time.
4477 Hollywood Boulevard is still rental office space today with lawyers and accountants, its main tenants. But in 1947, these were the secondary offices of the feisty independent Monogram Pictures.
We leased out a couple of offices, one across the way from the other. And we took those offices to set up our production company. That's how we began it.
Now, when Ed lived and worked here, he had yet to write or direct any of the films for which he would eventually earn his bizarre and extraordinary reputation. And he was almost a decade away from creating his magnum opus, the film which will always be associated with his name, and the one that we're here to document and to celebrate, Plan 9 from Outer Space.
They come from the bowels of hell, a transformed race of walking dead, zombies guided by a master plan for complete domination of the Earth. Plan 9 from Outer Space.
It's been called a sci-fi exploitation masterpiece, a triumph of will over talent, the greatest of unintentional comedies, and by some, the worst film of all time. Call it what you will, Plan 9 from Outer Space is a bona fide cult phenomenon. In fact, it's the king of the cult movies. And today, some 36 years after it was made, its notoriety continues to grow.
This is the most fantastic story I've ever heard. And every word of it's true, too. That's the fantastic part of it.
Ed Wood was a charming guy. He had flamboyancy, wore the mustache, and he looked a little bit like Earl Flynn.
Plan 9's creator was a high-spirited, surprisingly charming, ambitious, complex, and unusual man. Almost immediately upon his arrival in Hollywood at the age of 24, he would begin attracting to himself what one critic has uncharitably described as an entourage of Day of the Locust weirdos, to whom Wood tried to play benign Svengali. He promised these fellow showfolk work in his films, if he ever got to make any.
I said, Ed, look, I'm no actor. I have no intentions of ever appearing in films. I have no training as an actor. Don't worry about it, he says. You're in my pictures.
We were Hollywood bottom fish, I guess. You know, a bizarre Hollywood losers, and that's what was available to him.
Eventually, Wood's stock company would grow to include its most famous members, the great but by then fading horror star Bela Lugosi, the flamboyant newspaper and television psychic Criswell, TV horror hostess Vampira, and the 400-pound wrestler-turned-actor Tor Johnson. More about them later. Over a 32-year career until his death in 1978, Ed Wood struggled to finance and wrote, produced, and directed 7 films and scripted at least 5 films for other low-budget directors. A lightning-fast typist, he also sold reams of short fiction to lurid magazines and wrote scores of steamy and violent exploitation paperbacks, when his sporadic opportunities as a director began to decline. In the 70s, he would even write and direct sex education, softcore, and even a number of hardcore pornographic films to keep bread on the table.
A friend of mine from New York, a publisher, he had some of the girly magazines. He needed somebody to write a couple of stories. So I said, listen, I have a good writer, a good friend of mine. So I introduced Alan Stern to Eddie Wood.
He would only give those books to his close friends. He'd autograph them. To him, it was just
a crutch to pay bills until he could do another mainstream movie.
I think that it really broke him. The fact that he ended up directing Super 8 movies for some porno series called The Encyclopedia of Sex. You know, and this is not a job for a guy who made such classics as Plan 9 and Bride of the Monster and Glen or Glenda.
At the time they were made, Wood's films were given the most limited of theatrical release.
To kind of give you an idea of where his films were, think of let's say a Russ Meyer film. An Ed Wood film would be about 10 rungs down the ladder from his.
Nevertheless, the best of Wood's output, though made for next to nothing, technically imperfect, and unconventionally directed, to put it mildly, exerts a unique and feverish pull on the viewer. Ed Wood hurled his artistic heart and soul into his movies, and he did it with a solemn conviction that was almost frightening.
He aimed so high, and I think that's what makes these films almost comic, is that they try so hard. The actors try so hard. And he as a director and as a writer tries so hard to make some kind of statement about that's going to move you.
You know, it's an interesting thing when you consider the Earth people who can think are so frightened by those who cannot, the dead.
The fact that he made these pictures against all odds, including his own total lack of talent as a filmmaker, I think is what speaks the best about him. I mean, he really wanted to do this, and he did it. And the big difference between Ed Wood and his detractors like the Medveds and other people, the people who really put him down and say he was not just a bad filmmaker, but a worthless filmmaker, which are two different things, is that he actually made these movies, by God.
And or any of his pictures they are truly an extension of where he was coming from, which is, I suppose, a definition of what a pure filmmaker is supposed to be about. Why they continue to fascinate us is the fact that they were so inept, so perfectly inept, that they wind up being legitimately good in a completely reverse sort of way.
Ed Wood's life and career were filled with alternating bursts of creative expression and longer periods of personal and professional frustration. He loved movies, and he wanted to make them, but lacking any real experience, he was unable to find work within the studio system. And this forced him time and again to find backing from money men in other professions.
A filmmaker like Ed Wood, who, best word would be to use unique to describe what he did, probably has a window of time where what he or she does, they can get away with it. And they're the ones that are most likely to hire or employ themselves. And so it could be tough to have a vision as unique as what Plan 9 and Glen or Glenda and Bride of the Monster and all those movies, to have that unique vision and then have somebody else hire you.
Ed was always being approached by distributors for many of his projects, but he didn't want to tie in first, because, you know, the thrill of producing is having a sleeper on your hands. And if you tie it up with a pre-release, then you're limited to a budget. The distributor or releasing company will generally have one of their production men there writing herd every minute. And when it's all over with, they wind up owning it all, you know. So your end is very small for all your efforts. So he preferred to take the gamble, the risk, do it as cheaply as possible, and then, you know, try for the best distribution he can get.
Though Wood enjoyed the creative freedom that came with independent financing, the strain of sustaining his career in this way would eventually take its toll.
There's a saying that every artist in the world is going to have his heart broken by the world. That was certainly the case with Ed.
He would hit the jug, the sauce. It was toward the end where he just gave up completely. And it wasn't a fact of feeling sorry for himself. It was a fact that he said to himself, I failed.
I understand that he was he was an alcoholic, but a periodic drinker. And we, people who, like me, who didn't know him well, would see him only when he was on the manic side of his persona. And we saw him always extremely ebullient.
Well, he said, Paul, he says, I'm doing my best. Look at me, he says. I could have been a millionaire. I should have $1 million in the bank right now. And he started crying.
That was a time that he seemed to be in a period of depression or lethargy and melancholy, and he would call The minister that played the minister in the film, I think his name was Lemon, I believe. I was told that sometime late at night, he would call him and they would talk.
Wood was also a cross-dresser, a fact known to just a few friends at first. It was a condition that he would explore in his very first feature film, I Changed My Sex, better known as Glenn or Glenda. Wood acts in the film as well, playing Glenn, who struggles with his compulsion for wearing women's clothing. The rumors that Wood directed in drag throughout his career can be traced to the making of this film, in which he had to direct a number of scenes while appearing in them as well, clothed in skirt, blouse, and heels to portray Glenn's alter ego, Glenda.
Glenn or Glenda, this is his plea for the world to understand transvestism and to understand why he is so attracted to Angora.
He had a fetish for Angora sweaters one day, and he was telling me how much he liked Angora sweaters, and it went on, and I nodded my head, you know, and I listened. It reminded me of Queeg and the Caine Mutiny with the steel balls.
It would seem to me that the mother wanted the daughter. But evidently, they did dress him up in little girl's clothes, and his comment to people was, well, you know, they didn't know what the hell they were doing to me.
Bill Thompson arranged a meeting between me and Eddie. I don't know who called who, I think Eddie called me. And I said, okay, I'll meet you at the Brown Derby on Las Feliz. And because we never met each other, I told him I'll meet you at the bar, ask the maitre d', and he'll tell you who I am. So I went a little bit early, I'm sitting at the bar having a drink, and I told the maitre d', I'm expecting a gentleman, he's gonna ask him. After a little while, the maitre d', whom I knew quite well, he came and said, Mr. Apostolov, he never called me Mr. Apostolov, Mr. Apostolov, your date is here. What are you talking about? And I turned, and my God, here is Eddie. I have never seen Eddie before in my life, but the first impression was I thought I'm gonna die. Eddie was wearing, I'll never forget it, white sweater, Angora sweater, mini skirts, because that was in the 60s. A red mini skirt, white boots, high heels, a funny baloney tits here, and a 3-day beard he didn't shave, and a mustache, and a very masculine voice. Hello, how are you? Glad to meet you. It was funny.
Ed Wood was born in this house in Poughkeepsie, New York on October 10th, 1924.
Edward D. Wood Sr. was a postal inspector, or postal clerk, and Lillian was a jewelry buyer. And if they didn't know where he was, they did know where he was. He was at the movies, because he had gotten a job as a usher at the Bardavon Theater. He became a fan of the serials, like Flash Gordon, Buck Jones. Buck Jones was his childhood hero, and Chandu the Magician. He was definitely impressed and saw Dracula when it played in Poughkeepsie in 1931. So he was about 6 or 7 years old at that time. And seeing Dracula was, I guess, like a very dramatic turning point for Ed. And he never forgot that.
His mother was a doll collector. She was a fragile, bird-like woman who collected little miniature porcelain dolls. She kept them in glass showcases, lighted, and you know, they were adorable little figures. And she raised her pretty little baby boy, rather, I think, as though he were a little porcelain doll. So his escape was the movies on Saturday afternoons. And I think that became his real world. You know, that could be why he went into films.
Rudolph Gray, author of the recent book Nightmare of Ecstasy, The Life and Art of Edward D. Wood, Jr., has spent the last 10 years researching Wood's life. He notes that while Wood's parents may have been overly protective of their only child, They happily encouraged his fascination with the movies.
I would say Ed Wood's parents did encourage his creative side, because when he was 11 years old, they did get him a movie camera, which is something I'm sure he wanted for a long time.
Author Gray feels strongly that there is a need to document the lives of filmmakers like Wood.
This Twilight area of film, if you want to call it that, really needs to be documented. Directors like Ed Wood, I mean, no one has really documented their struggle or their life.
Ed Wood's first job in Hollywood was as an actor, performing various roles at a local playhouse called the Gateway Theater. It was here that Ed Wood met John Crawford Thomas, a fellow actor who would prove to be Ed's first financier. Crawford and Ed originally teamed up to produce commercials, but eager to make movies, Ed suggested they make a Western featurette instead.
We wanted to produce this movie, and the next day he comes up with a script, and I didn't even know he could write.
Even at this early stage, as a director, Ed's strength seemed to lay less in meticulous preparation than in applying an instant ingenuity.
In the case of Coffin for the Crossroads of Laredo, I said, "Where's a coffin? Where are you going to get a coffin?" And they came, within minutes, they came up with a cardboard coffin. And it didn't look like much of a coffin, but he got it together.
Wood himself appears in one of Crossroads of Laredo's early scenes.
He was traveling. It was Don Nagel who was the villain and shot Ed Wood on the trail.
Crossroads of Laredo was never completed. Crawford Thomas was forced to pull the plug on the production when it went dangerously over budget. It was the end of his and Ed Wood's short-lived partnership.
More money was being requested, to the best of my knowledge, for additional expenses. And then I believe we're dovetailing into, Ed's end of it, where, I would have to be supporting him too.
Crawford Thomas still owns the negative to Crossroads of Laredo and hopes to release it to Ed Wood fans in the future. The following year, Ed is asked to be cameraman on a short film Conrad Brooks and his brother Henry want to make as a showcase for their acting talents. Shooting takes place at a since built-over ranch near the Mulholland Fountain in the Los Feliz area of LA. In his zeal, Wood winds up taking over the set, directing as well as shooting. Examination of this footage resulted in a unique discovery. A second camera on the set that day in 1948 had managed to capture the only known film record of Ed Wood directing. Wood continued to knock around Hollywood for the next several years, struggling to get various projects going but accomplishing relatively little, until he meets an actor whose impact upon him as a child he has never forgotten, an actor who will dramatically affect the course of Ed's young career, Bela Lugosi.
I was a real Bela Lugosi fan. I love everything he's done, man. He's one of the most curious figures there is in horror.
For more than 2 decades, Lugosi had been an international horror star, appearing in such films as The Black Cat, The Raven, White Zombie, Murders in the Rue Morgue, Son of Frankenstein.
Father was Frankenstein, that your mother was the lightning.
Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and the role he was never to escape, Dracula.
Doesn't Dracula ever end for you?
No. Dracula never ends. I don't know whether I shall call it a fortune or a course, but it never ends.
But it did end. By the early 50s, Lugosi found himself virtually unemployable in Hollywood, a victim of typecasting and changing times. Even Universal Pictures, when casting Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948, almost overlooked Bela to reprise the role of the vampire count.
This is awful silly stuff.
I think it was Paul Marco who was working over at Universal on a film, and he heard they were doing
this, and they'd auditioned 3 other people for Dracula or something, and they hadn't even called Lugosi. And he offered Lugosi's name, and they said, well, we didn't think he was still alive.
At the age of 70, Lugosi is reduced to making promotional appearances for films he has nothing to do with, such as the 1953 Vincent Price film House of Wax. Touched by Lugosi's plight, Ed Wood befriends Bela, and the two become quite close. Ed arranges a successful Las Vegas horror review for Lugosi, and before long has Bela anticipating a comeback. Wood began planning a series of films to star the forgotten king of horror.
Pull the string. Dance to that. Which one is created for?
In Glen or Glenda, Wood made bizarre use of Lugosi as an omnipotent puppet master of mankind. Makeup artist Harry Thomas.
Lugosi was respected. And of all people, I respected him. And I believe I might have mentioned it to you sometime when I was cutting his hair, that he gave me this big black cigar, and not to offend him, he lit it and put it in my mouth, and I was high. And being as young as I was at that time, I felt this dizziness, this vertigo. And every time the cigar would go out, I'd be happy. But he'd see it and relight it, which was the worst thing that could happen to me.
The standard view of Ed and Bela's relationship has been that Wood exploited Lugosi as a box office shill to further his own career. But the truth was more complicated.
I have a feeling that Lugosi became to Ed Wood sort of as Renfield to Dracula, that Ed Wood felt that he had a falling star here, that perhaps he could help rise once again, and genuinely cared about him.
They were both kind of hoyden and cut-ups. You know, you wouldn't think Bela Lugosi was, but he was Scorpio. And they would go to the cemetery, literally, the true cemetery. And Bela would put on a black cape. And Ed always had this whimsy, pixie, craziness with intelligence all combined, which makes genius, they say. But he would run through the cemetery, and Bela would be after him, and they would just have a ball.
I was able to see something about how he treated, how Ed treated Bela and what the relationship was. And I now reason that initially it was probably a business relationship. Ed was able to get a hold of a star name for peanuts, right? A has-been who was working for nothing practically, and that's all Ed could afford. And so he was grateful to have it, but it grew into a really beautiful friendship. Ed was there for him because Ed was a sweet, tender heart, and this man was sick and dying, and he was old and friendless and poor and needed medicine, and Ed was there for him.
Lugosi next starred for Wood in Bride of the Monster. During production, it was apparent Lugosi's health was failing, and the proud actor's decade-long medically incurred addiction to morphine was no secret to the cast and crew. Paul Marco played Kelton the cop for Wood in 3 films. He recalls having to break shooting in the middle of the night in Griffith Park to drive Lugosi home for an injection of what Lugosi called his medicine.
First thing that caught my eye was this huge picture of him with his cape on, very sturdy, and looked like Count Dracula. So I'm sitting there like this, and he goes to these drapes, and he pulls open the drapes, and I'm all agog trying to see everything, and he goes to sink, washes his hands real good, takes a little towel, and wipes it. Then he has one of these sternal heaters, sort of, and took out a sterile needle and went through all this religious thing. And I'm watching him. And then he gave him the injection, and he went right back doing the same thing. Taking his apron off, hanging it on the hook, washing his hands, right all over again. And everything was perfect in there. And closed the curtain, and I'm sitting right there. He says, "Well, Paulie, everything okay with you?" I said, "Yes." I said, "It's beautiful." I said, "How do you feel?" He said, "Paulie, I feel real good now. Let's go back."
Lugosi's debilitating physical condition led to pitiful bouts of despair. On an out-of-town publicity tour for a film made for another director, actor Tor Johnson had to intervene to save the actor from himself.
They were doing the public relations for Black Sleep. Lugosi had been misbehaving, apparently, with the bottle as the story went, and he had this mad impulse to throw himself out the window. And Tor had to keep him from doing it, and did so several times.
In April of 1955, emaciated, sick, and depressed, Lugosi voluntarily commits himself to Metropolitan State Hospital for the treatment of his addiction. Perversely, he alerts the press himself. Nationwide headlines result, but Lugosi is pulled from the brink while in rehab and is released in better health than he's been in years. Early in 1956, Ed Wood came into some cash from an investor, just enough to shoot a day's worth of silent footage with Lugosi in his Dracula cape. Among the locations, a cemetery, and this house in Sylmar, California, the home of actor Tor Johnson at the time.
The grief of his wife's death became greater and greater agony.
I remember the first day shooting on this, he only had $900, not even enough to do a day's shooting in those days. But he went to Kodak, bought the negative, and off we went. Got a hold of Bela Lugosi, who was at that time a very close friend of his, and started improvising and shooting with what we had.
Contrary to accounts published since, this scant footage was shot with no particular storyline in mind. It would be the basis for Ed Wood's most infamous film, but not until after unexpected tragedy strikes. On August 16th, 1956, Bela Lugosi is dead.
No, no. Dracula never ends. I don't know whether I shall call it a fortune or a cause, but it never ends.
Well, at the funeral, which was at a parlor kind of catty-cornered from on Hollywood Boulevard from Pantage's Theater, I arrived somewhat early. I don't believe there was anybody in the parlor at the moment, and he was lying in his casket, and I just stood there for about 5 minutes, sort of reminiscing about him. And I know the thought passed my mind that in case he was hovering around in spirit form, I thought, well, Bailey, I think you'll be very pleased with your last performance.
Ed was pretty broken up because of several reasons. One, that was probably his best friend at the time. And two, he had a lot of projects planned using Bela.
And there's this strange story that when his body was being transported up to Hollywood Boulevard, it was supposed to go to the right, and somehow or other, almost like a magnet, he was drawn down Hollywood Boulevard as though he were saying farewell to his film world.
Lugosi requested in his will that he be buried in one of the capes he wore in Dracula. He was. These are the Mariposa apartments in Hollywood where Ed Wood was living in 1956. Now that Bela was gone, Ed was at a loss for what to do next. Searching his imagination for inspiration, a daring, even crazy idea began to take hold. What if he were to make a film with his old friend, despite the fact that Bela was no longer among the living?
And I thought it was quite wonderful that I played opposite a dead man. That, very strange. Very strange, isn't it, to proceed with the movie even though the star is dead.
He'd be drinking his vodka, typing like crazy, smoking a cigarette, got the television on, all at one time. Then there'd be company around, and I don't know how he did it, and talk like this and type, and you sit there and you say, oh my goodness, oh, can't believe it, a dynamo.
This is what's left of the cemetery used for the establishing shots in Plan 9 from outer space. When Ed Wood first wrote the script, he did so under the more lurid title, Grave Robbers from Outer Space. Written in less than 2 weeks, Grave Robbers tells a tale of aliens who plan to take over the Earth by marching our own reanimated dead upon our major cities.
Plan 9. Ah, yes. Plan 9 deals with the resurrection of the dead. Long-distance electrode shot into the pineal and pituitary glands of recent dead.
He liked science fiction, Now, when Planet 9 was made, or Gravediggers, there was a run of people calling in, they've seen sources. He would capitalize on the behavior and the topic of the day.
I think Ed Wood in himself was influenced by something from the 1930s from Startling Stories, a pulp magazine, which had a similar theme of grave robbers robbing corpses from outer space.
If he had a storyboard, and I thought, no, that's not the way he worked. He worked like decoupage. It's like if you're making a patchwork quilt. You've got this piece and that piece, and you sew it all, stitch it all together. And it's different from designing a pattern and a sketch and saying, I'm going to do a fleur-de-lis, and then around that will be a sunburst. And that would be having a storyboard if you start with a master design. I don't think he didn't start with a master design. He grabbed what was handy and stuck it onto something else that was available, and so it grew.
Armed with his footage of Bella and his patchwork script, Ed raised a bit more money and did a little more shooting, but soon shut down production to look for more investors. It wasn't until he met a man named Ed Reynolds, who managed the apartment complex Ed was living in, that he found his primary investor.
Ed Reynolds was actually the only contact that I had with Plan 9, Grave Robbers from Outer Space, the original title. Ed Reynolds came out to the West Coast, and he and his wife joined a little small church on Cynthia Street near Doheny, near Beverly Hills. And my wife and I, we had just been married, and we lived across the street from the church in a little cottage on Weatherly Drive, and we went to that church occasionally, and that was where I met Ed Reynolds.
Ed Reynolds himself appears in Plan 9 as a gravedigger. That's him on the right.
One day he came to me about a year or two later, excited that he had raised some money. He was going to make a film starring Bela Lugosi. And he wanted me to be the young leading man in the film. And I said to Ed, but Bela Lugosi is dead. He said, he reassured me that there was a very genius writer-director named Ed Wood, who had written a clever screenplay around some existing footage of Bela Lugosi, and he was going to use his chiropractor, who resembled Lugosi, to do the stand-in or the other scenes.
Dr. Tom Mason, who was indeed Ed Wood's chiropractor, had been a drinking buddy of Ed's since before Bela Lugosi died.
He used to go work on Ed because he never typed comfortably. He was sitting on the edge of a bed like this. There's the coffee table. Humped over is a typewriter like this. Phone is there. That's as far as it goes. Just like that. And he would have cramps like this, so he would come over and give him a massage or something on the vertebrae and pop his back or stuff. So, but I never did. Well, let's see, when he said Tom was going to do it, I said, God, the same thing you said, you know. He said, leave it to me, leave it to me. It's going to work, leave it to me. That's his way he says it. It's off. Dad knows who's talking. He said it, and he's doing it that way.
This is Bella, and this is Tom Mason in his characteristic cape-over-the-face pose. Their resemblance may have been minimal, but as far as Ed was concerned, it was close enough. Tom Mason would also take a role and put money into a later Ed Wood film, Night of the Ghouls.
Now I grow weary, weak. The strain of spanning the everlasting is so tiring. How say you, Maud?
Mason died in 1980, but his wife, Margaret, still lives in Anaheim, California. Occasionally referring to her husband by his middle name, Bob, she offers this explanation of his role in Plan 9.
I'm Margaret Mason, and my husband was Dr. Thomas R. Mason, and he was a chiropractor, and he was also into a lot of psychology and stuff, and he had just met Bela Lugosi, which Bela Lugosi thought he looked like him, because they both had ears that stuck out. anyway, he was going to treat Bela Lugosi for his cocaine habit, which I don't know whether you want that on tape or not. But nevertheless, we went on a trip then, and when he came back, he was supposed to start with him. Well, while we were on the trip, we found out that Bela Lugosi had died. So then Bob was used as a substitute for Bela Lugosi in making of this Planet of the Ghouls, or whatever it was.
Harry Thomas, Plan 9's makeup artist, toiled on nearly all of Wood's productions. Some of his earlier creations were the little people in the Superman and the Mole Men episode of the Superman TV series.
When you were told about Ed Wood's intention to use this previously shot footage of Lugosi and to double him with Tom Mason, did you find this inventive, or did you feel that maybe it wouldn't work?
Well, I had the mixed emotions about that. I thought perhaps it would work. Mason did his best.
Was anything done to Tom Mason to make him look as much like Lugosi as possible?
Just his hair and his cape and his face, the sort of an imaginary profile or semblance of Lugosi. But not too much done. As a matter of fact, I can't remember ever doing anything for Mason along those lines because of this hidden face. I think any tall, slender person would have been adequate.
Well, did you watch any of the scenes with Bob in them being filmed?
Well, I just remember those where he was in, you know, with the cape and all. And I've seen that many times on TV since his death, and I'd call up people and say, I saw Bob on TV, and they thought I was nuts.
What did you tell me Ed Wood would end?
More smoke, more smoke. He was always hollering for more smoke.
The smoke Wood was calling for was to diffuse the glare of studio lights and give his tiny cemetery set atmosphere. Although Lugosi and Tom Mason are clearly dressed as Lugosi's legendary screen persona, Count Dracula, the character Lugosi plays in Plan 9 is not meant to be a vampire at all. Yet despite this, the screenplay refers to him as Dracula or the Dracula character throughout. The resulting confusion as one watches Plan 9 is one of its stranger incongruities, and one that connoisseurs of the film savor.
I was confused by that myself when I first read it. As I say, when I got the screenplay, it didn't make heads or tails of me, because I saw the words Dracula and this and that. I think that when Wood sat down to write the screenplay, he just wrote as fast as he could, and thinking of Bela Lugosi, he thought of Dracula, and he used that as a handle to just indicate what the scene was.
He always kept things going to where he could change the script right in the middle and do something else. And as long as his favorite expression was dramatic license, if he thought something would be passable without bringing too much criticism, okay, let it go. So Dracula was both a vampire and someone else in the same picture. So what? Nobody really paid that close attention.
Now bankrolled by Ed Reynolds and several of his fellow Baptists, Plan 9 entered its main period of production. The shooting schedule called for 5 days in the studio and 2 more days of various silent exteriors. The title change to Plan 9 was imposed by the Baptists, who felt the word grave robbers was sacrilegious. Also, Reynolds and company requested that Ed Wood and some of the cast be baptized before finally agreeing to fund the production. To keep the cash coming in, Ed agreed.
I think Reynolds suspected Ed being a drinker, because Reynolds himself was an alcoholic at one time. And when he got to know Ed Wood, I mean, he took a liking to Ed Wood, and he kind of thought, well, if he brought religion to him, might straighten his life out.
And he was duly baptized, and I was there the night that he was baptized, standing there resplendent in a white robe as he was immersed beneath the waters. And he also had, as I call, his menagerie of friends and actors and astrologers and ex-wives, and they began to, excuse me, they began to follow him to church. They had heard that there was a money man at that church who was going to bankroll Ed Wood in some films, and they decided, hey, we better get in on this. So they were there. And it was very amusing to see these pasty-faced, odd Hollywood people sitting there with the old, sweet little old ladies in church on Sunday morning.
Tor Johnson got converted. So did I. And Tor's wife, Greta.
And what did you have to do? Go into a swimming pool?
Yeah, well, Tor did. Because Tor was such a huge man. But I was, at the church, they put me in a, what do you call, like a tub. So, you know, and they poured this water over you and they baptized you. But Tor, swimming pool. And Ed Wood as well. Ed took the pool.
The location was at a soundstage near Western and Santa Monica. I walked down this very musty, narrow alley to where I found this little small soundstage ensconced in behind these buildings. It's just a tiny soundstage.
It had good sound facilities. You didn't hear the street noise. You didn't hear the planes. It was well insulated.
I walked through the doors and I found that the crew working, setting lights, and there were a number of Ed Wood's actors and performers milling around talking, and as I looked around, I could see that they had put all the sets inside this one soundstage, including the graveyard. The set that was to be my patio in my house was pretty well, it was pretty well okay, but the rest of the sets looked like a amateurish 6th grade play.
It's safe to say that most actors or technicians reporting for work at Quality for the first time were taken aback by the studio's hidden-away location and small size. This is Quality Studios today, tightly sandwiched between a strip club and an apartment building that, at the time Plan 9 was made, was called the Harvey Hotel. Quality rented out its stages to low-budget producers throughout the 40s and 50s, but no one who worked there on Plan 9 from Outer Space had gone anywhere near it in almost 35 years. Locating it for this documentary was a challenge, but by searching the neighborhood street by street, it was finally rediscovered.
At that time, the neighborhood where Quality Studios was located was like, you know, it would be, if you were just walking by there on a evening's walk or something, a very depressing place. But when Ed Wood's company would be shooting there, the whole block came alive. I mean, you know, he was always a lively person, and everybody else was happy around him. And suddenly, the whole block took on a whole new character, you know, and everybody would be milling about, and people would be walking off the streets to look at what's going on there, because it was such an unlikely place for a studio in the first place. But a lot of work got accomplished there.
My name is Romas Yesikonis. I'm the owner of this property here on Santa Monica Boulevard in Hollywood. It was formerly called Quality Studios.
Do you know who owned it before that? Who did you buy it from?
Yes, I bought it from Falcon Sound Studios. The owner of the Falcon Sound Studio was Hovi Kalikian. And he's the one that built the studio. This was nothing but an empty shell prior to him taking over. But when I bought the property, he was in here ready. It was still open. He only had one sound room. And he continued on until he put lots of sound rooms in here.
What did he tell you about the history of the building?
He told me that this was previously used as a sound stage. They were making various types of movies in here before he took over, and the building was really empty, and he did all the additions and soundproofed rooms himself with the stages. It was a movie theater back in the old Hollywood days. This was, I guess, 20s and 30s, way back. The last tenant that occupied this was another studio called Shamrock Studios. And of course...
What did they do?
They had bands come in here and rehearse.
What are your future plans for the building?
I might turn it into a swap meet.
It's tough to find something when you don't know what you're looking for.
Actor Conrad Brooks, on the left, played Jamie opposite Paul Marco's Kelton the Cop in Plan 9 cemetery scenes. He was kind enough to lead the Plan 9 companion on a tour of Quality Studios today.
Well, that's strange. Years ago, they had a huge sign up there called Quality Pictures. Really? Not there now. Of course, now that's going back, well, let's see, remember now. I gotta check this place out. The Harvey Hotel to the right.
Who used to stay at the Harvey Hotel?
Well, let's see. Mostly show people. No big stars. Mostly, you know, bit actors, people who play supporting roles, and technicians, and a lot of showgirls.
And next door we've got a bar. What's it called?
Right, it's called Gold Diggers now, which is in 1991. This back in 52 was also called then the Gold Diggers. Eddie Wood's favorite place. He loved his martinis. Good. Now, we're ready to go?
Yeah,
oh, boy, am I in for a surprise.
What's bring back any memories, Conrad?
Yes, quite a few. Now, as I recall, the shadow here against the wall here, it's sealed right now. But actually, there were there was a small office here, and there was one to the right of me. I don't remember this here. This was sealed off here. This must have been recently put up, or there's no opening at all before.
Really?
That wasn't there at all.
Conrad, we found this on the floor. It may be one of the flying saucers, although I kind of doubt it.
Knowing Ed Wood, if it was here to use it somehow. Well, listen, it might work. Let's try it.
What do you suppose that noise was?
Whatever it was, it's no more strange than the other things happening around this cemetery.
Now, this is the exact spot where we shot the graveyard sequence. And the scene was between actor Paul Marco and myself. And as I remember, my famous line in this scene here with Paul Marco, went like this.
It's tough to find something when you don't know what you're looking for.
It's sure hard to find something when you don't know what you're looking for. How's that, Mark?
He let the actors do it. He was involved in the technical aspects of where the camera stood and where the lights were and the moves. He was involved in, and he was deeply engrossed. One thing I noticed on that set was that everybody was deeply engrossed in his or her job. And when you're in a major studio, there's a lot of boredom sitting around, a lot of card playing, and nobody's paying. Everyone's clock watching. And here, I guess because these people were trying to make names for themselves, they're all, checking their makeup or checking their hair or reading their lines, or they were all gung-ho to, almost too tensely determined.
I feel the most important person on any of Eddie's pictures was the cameraman, Bill Thompson.
I was very beautiful in that film in Plan 9. It was because of him. He lit me very well, photographed me very well. I mean, we may have seen a pillow on the grass that we weren't supposed to see in the cemetery, but he lit me beautifully. Before he started filming, he came and introduced himself to me and told me I was very beautiful and was honored to do me. Well, hey, now is that uplifting? Of course.
I saw a flying saucer.
Saucer? You mean the kind from up there?
Yeah, its counterpart. It was shaped like a huge cigar. Dan and Edith saw it too. Oh, it burns me up. These things have been seen for years. They're here, it's a fact. Oh, but what's the use of making a fuss? But last night I saw a flying object that couldn't have possibly been from this planet. But I can't say a word. I'm muzzled by Army brass.
Character actor Gregory Walcott is one of Plan 9's more illustrious alumni, having appeared in over 60 major motion pictures and more than 300 television shows, including Norma Ray and Steven Spielberg's Sugarland Express. Walcott remembers that, for him, Ed Wood's style of film directing took some getting used to.
He gave us very little direction, and he was mainly just concerned about getting it on film and getting his shots done and set up, and very little exposition. He wouldn't get you off in the corner and help you to get down to the amoeba of the scene or the motivation of it. I don't think he knew what the motivation was, nor could he describe it. He just wanted to get the actors in a position where they would say the lines and say them where you could hear them.
Tragic.
Regarding takes, he very seldom would do a retake. If someone flooded the line in a scene, he'd say, shoot the entire scene. We'll just go over it. We'll just cover the errors in a cover shots, pickup shots. So he was not so much concerned with quality as quantity, as getting it on film.
Burbank Tower, this is American Flight 812. Over. Wouldn't surprise me any if he's asleep this time of the morning.
American Flight 812, this is Burbank Tower. If I were asleep, you'd never get on the ground. In your case, maybe I ought to leave you up there for good. Over.
You got me that time, Mac. This is American Flight 812 requesting...
It was the last scene that I had to shoot, the last day, where it was supposed to be a scene in a cockpit and of an airplane. And normally when I do a scene, I like to get to the set ahead of time and, you know, for a couple hours and just kind of get the feel of it and what the choreography is going to be and logistics. And so I said to Ed Wood, where's the cockpit set? He says, well, they're building it. So I waited for, you know, an hour or so and kept waiting for them to bring the cockpit onto the soundstage. And about an hour before the scene was to be filmed, two carpenters brought on two masonite boards and bent them into an arc and then nailed them somehow to the floor, and then they put shower curtains behind that, and that was the hull of the airplane, the cockpit. And then they brought in from the spaceship some various pieces of the radio set, and that made up the cockpit. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and the cameraman shook his head. He couldn't. It looked awful.
He was very busy, Ed, and happily so. But it seemed to be all camera busyness. And then, of course, he had his megaphone when it was actually rolling to give the immediate instruction through the megaphone. That always came through the megaphone.
Did you find that kind of comical?
I found it flowery. I liked it. I didn't find it funny. I found it rather sweet. I didn't know that nobody else was doing it anymore. I thought it was rather poetic.
The bullhorn, yeah. Well, yeah, if she was at a distance, you know, why strain your voice?
Ed said, he says, I have some Martians in here, and Tor likes you. He'll be on the picture, Tor Johnson. And he said that you won't have to do too much with the bit parts and things like that. He says, but you may have to have some help because there are Martians in it. Right away, I thought, gee, this is a challenge for me.
You have your report?
We had to pull in here to Space Station 7 for regeneration. We're returning to the planet Earth immediately thereafter.
What progress has been made?
We contacted government officials. They refuse our existence.
I don't even know why Eddie even used me, because I never got to do the Martians. He said, we don't have the time, we don't have the money. I was disappointed because I had sketched out what I thought would be best for these people, even the clothing. And unfortunately, I never got to do it. They came out with the barbershop haircuts and the Oxford accents, and I did go to the sound man and said, can we do anything different with the sound? Because in the original drawings, I had the mouths, instead of normal like we have, I had them circled, and they would speak where they would articulate, and you could understand them, but there'd be a slight whistle, a little vibration of a whistle through the voice. And this could be done through the sound. Well, Ed didn't buy it.
Minutes later, the police, led by Inspector Daniel Clay, arrived at the scene.
Who found them?
The man and girl.
Medical examiner been around yet?
Just left. Okay, Inspector. What are you going to do?
Look around a little.
Pretty dark out there. Once you get beyond the range of those lights, you won't be able to see your hand in front of your face.
I will get one of the flashlights from the patrol car.
Okay, be careful, Clay.
I'm a big boy now, Johnny.
Tor liked me to do his makeup. He was just like a big Cupid doll. He was like a big child.
I love Tor Johnson and Vampira's expressions, especially Tor Johnson's. They're pretty priceless. I can't imagine what he was told and how to, what they're telling him to do. What am I supposed to do? Do that.
Bring the giant here that I may get a better look at him.
The eyes were lenses. And in other pictures, I did do other things with his eyes, but not this one. This picture had the lenses. Now I have taken the skin of an egg, a fresh egg, and break it and use the skin to put over their own sclera, that lining of the eye. The scars were created on Tor's face with cotton, spirit gum, and collodion. And I make sure that it wouldn't be a permanent scar or would be detrimental to his skin. You have to be careful because sometimes collodion will burn, especially if it's used over the same area more than once. So I was certainly to move it over just a little each time so it wouldn't be over the same spot.
And was Tor pretty patient with that process of the makeup?
No, Tor is always like a child, you know, getting his hair cut. He anticipates it, but he's not happy. He wanted to let his hair grow, and I said, if you let your hair grow, your career will go down the sewer. I said, that ball, and I want my hair. I says, no, Tor, don't let your hair grow. Keep it shaved. I'd run the blade over it, the barber's blade, you know, the clipper over it, just make sure that none of it was stubbing out. He's a nice person. I kind of miss him.
It's likely a lot of people miss actor Tor Johnson. Born Tor Johansson in 1903 in Sweden, Tor passed away in 1971. He appeared in at least 25 films, always typecast as heavies in the most literal sense. Tor even squared off in a wrestling match against actor Dan Blocker in an episode of TV's Bonanza. But his fame rests on 6 fright films made between 1955 and 1961, 3 of them with Ed Wood. Tor's fame was further solidified courtesy of a rubber mask, first issued by the Don Post Mask Company in 1965. The mask made Tor's face familiar to millions of people who would otherwise have no idea who he is. Don Post Studios still thrives in North Hollywood. Don Post Sr. virtually invented the latex mask as we know it in the late 1940s. He also worked, uncredited, on classic science fiction films, including Invasion of the Body Snatchers, for which he sculpted the pods and other makeup effects.
I'd like to go back and say that probably the first fan that I ever met, and I think in order to bring some of these other elements in, like to bring Tor in, probably the first fan of science fiction that I ever became really aware of was Vern Langdon.
I was involved with wrestling, I was involved with radio, I was involved with college, I was involved with makeup. I was a lover of the theatrical and Don Post masks and that type of thing. So that's how I first met Don, and when I came in and looked at the business, I thought, you know, what they really need is a little direction here. And so I bought half of the business from Don and came in 1964, and as compared to 1864, and started making things that I wanted. Things that I wanted to have, a rubber skull and a Dracula mask, and set up a license with Universal.
was a life cast taken of the mask, but after that, it was sculpted using the life cast as a reference, and it was sculpted by Pat Newman. I think she really captured something of Tor. She captured his scariness, she captured his gentleness, and she captured that bigger-than-life feeling.
I thought it'd be a great mask. I wondered at the success of it, but again, I wanted one. I thought it should be done. It would have meant some royalties in Tor's pocket, so I set it up and we did it that way. And it was a good seller. One of the best sellers, in fact.
Tor is by far Plan 9 from outer space's most beloved and familiar mascot. This is due partly to the actor's threatening physical appearance, but perhaps it's also because audiences sensed that beneath the exteriors of the mute, hulking monsters Tor played, there was a kind and gentle soul.
Tor was like he was like a sugar bun inside.
I had put on a little convention, I think it was called California Con, something like that, and invited all of the fans from a couple hundred miles around who were readers of famous monsters to come, and the star of the occasion was Tor Johnson. He, you know, when you took off the mask of the monster, like Karloff, there was Santa Claus behind it.
I knew Tor from wrestling, and he was a great wrestler, the Super Swedish Angel. He was one of the most dangerous men in the sport because of his size, and he really packed a mean punch. And not too many guys came out of a match on top of Tor.
I remember him putting his arm around me, and I'm about maybe 5'11", 5'11 and a half. And Tor would put his arm around me, and my head would rest nestled in his armpit. The guy was huge. His arms seemed to be like this big.
He used to tell me little tricks of the trade there, and his favorite was, before he'd have a match with somebody, you know, commensurate with his power, would be, you know, he had that bald head, so he would take razor blades in between his fingers and he would just scratch his head about an hour before the match, and of course he'd draw blood. He'd try to just get a little bit below the skin layer so blood would come out, then he would blot it with a handkerchief in cold water or whatever, and by the time he'd get in the ring it would look perfectly normal. But then when the other wrestler would knock him to the ground, sooner or later a wrestler was going to get his head hit on a, you know, something, the ropes or the canvas, and when that would happen, it would open up again and blood would be all over the place.
He was a tremendous eater. He was just always eating up a storm. He always had trouble finding clothes that would fit. Most everything had to be custom made. He would get stuck in cars. You know, he'd get stuck in chairs in his own home. The things that I remember about him were his fun attitude and his enormous size and the warmth and love that you felt when you were with him. He'd put his arm around you and you'd just disappear. It was like, you know, like Andre the Giant. If you shake hands with Andre, your hand's gone. You know, he was here a minute ago. And if Tor put his arm around you, there was nothing of you left. You know? I locked up with him a few times, and I'll tell you, he had a headlock that would kill.
In the late 50s, Tor was an unlikely contestant on Groucho Marx's quiz show, You Bet Your Life.
Meet Groucho Marx.
Welcome to You Bet Your Life. Hey, this is... Who are you, crew chef?
Tor Johnson.
You're Tor Johnson? Why? Did he get angry at him?
No, that's a Swedish name. Tor Johnson is a Swedish name.
Oh, Tor Johnson, you mean, huh?
Yes.
I can't say Johnson.
In the course of preparing this documentary, it was learned that horror director Sam Raimi and Evil Dead 2 co-writer Scott Spiegel often recreate Tor's landmark appearance on Groucho's show for Friends. Fearlessly, both men agreed to perform their incredible simulation for the Plan 9 Companions cameras.
Who are you, crew chef?
Tor Johnson.
You're Tor Johnson? Well, why? Did you get angry at him?
Nope, it's a Swedish name. Tor Johnson is a Swedish name.
Oh, Tor Johnson. See, I can't say Johnson. Just for the record, Tor, what are your measurements? Not that I'm particularly interested, but you may be a missing boxcar that the Union Pacific Railroad is looking for.
My hips are 60, my stomach waistline is 54, my chest is 62, and my biceps are 22.
Say, we have the same measurements. Yeah, him and my automobile. Say, Tor, I don't understand. With those measurements, you should be twice as attractive as Jane Mansfield. But for some reason, you're not. Not to me, anyway. So, you say you're Japanese, Tor?
No, I'm Swedish.
And what part of Japan are you from?
Stockholm.
Stockholm is in Japan?
Stockholm is in Sweden,
Oh, really?
not in Japan.
I always thought Stockholm... I always thought I knew my lines.
We have no cutaways, Sam.
You
What are we
said
gonna
you
do?
could cut this thing.
No,
You
we'll-
promised me. I'll be in my trailer.
As I said, Drew Friedman, I think, had a large part to do with making Tor into a kind of a cultural icon with his Any Persons Living or Dead book.
I used to refer to myself as an illustrator when I was younger. Now I just like cartoonist because it's like, you know, it's like the lowest kind of artist you can be is a cartoonist. So I kind of like that. I wanted to disturb people, I guess, you know, and hopefully it's going to, you know, the stuff is going to be funny. I deal with real people and celebrities. And I want people to be confused into thinking that it's actually a recorded moment, that this has actually happened, that you know, Tor Johnson used to roam the streets of New York, and you know, these are photographs of it, of when it actually happened. If there's a thread that runs through everything, I guess it's the fact that it's all done in dots. I guess that sort of sums it up. Hopefully it's disturbing, it's dark and disturbing, and it's going to upset people. Although I'm not as interested in upsetting people as I used to be. The Tor Johnson work was never meant to make fun of him. It was always meant to pay tribute to his life, you know, and show that he was a working actor in Hollywood in the 50s, and you know, but he also had a life at home where he'd eat Swedish meatballs and the like. And it wasn't all glamour. I really enjoy drawing his face, you know, and he has like, as he got a little older, he got deep lines in his brow, and he's got the heavy eyebrows and the pug nose, and you know, and the pointy bald head. It's just, you know, fun to draw.
Vampire shot up like a skyrocket. She was extremely popular. She was, of course, the predecessor of Elvira, and she had this incredible waist. You could really just about put your two hands around it, and understand that she created that by fasting for 3 days before she appeared as her ghost hostess.
My name is Stephanie Locke, and I'm a dominatrix. That means I speak softly, carry a big whip, and wear leather for a living. I became a dominatrix at 19, and one of my men idolizes Vampira and always told me about her. And so I would wear black evening gowns and very dark lipstick, and he would pay homage to Vampira through me. She has had all the dominant symbols: dark hair, pale skin, dark lips, long fingernails, tightly cinched waist, the black clothing.
Mila Nurmi, otherwise known as Vampira, is another of Plan 9's casting cornerstones. And apparently we owe it all to Bela Lugosi himself.
He was sitting there with Bela, and they were watching Vampira introduce White Zombie. And Bela said, I'd like to work with her someday.
Vampira's TV show, which broadcast B horror movies, aired on Saturday nights at 11 on Channel 7 in Los Angeles. As her program opened, the original Mistress of the Dark would approach the camera out of a misty Gothic void, let out her trademark shrill scream, and seductively introduce herself to the Night Owl audience.
We have had in folklore, since the beginning of man, God knows, I guess, this anima of an evil, cool lady who is in control. She's usually a succubus. You know, she comes to men in their dreams and so on. But she's all-powerful, incredibly beautiful. Well, that impressed me tremendously as I grew up in the Depression, because we lived, everybody, the whole world was gray, demoralized, impoverished, and along came this glorious figure who was imperious and in control. Nothing bothered her. She was the dragon lady in Terry and the Pirates. It was a comic strip. And then my second introduction came through Disney's Snow White. There was the evil queen. Again, the same anima. And then Charles Addams did a box cartoon in the New Yorker, and this lady appeared again, and this time she looked like Gloria Swanson. And this time I was ready to do my own version of this anima. So I had to go to a public masquerade ball dressed as the Charles Addams lady. I bound my bosoms and went barefooted, and I wore the dank hair. And no Hollywood glamour makeup, no nails, nothing. I did the pristine Charles Addams version, and did indeed get discovered by Hunt Stromberg Jr., who was at Channel 7. But they wouldn't do the Addams family. They said they couldn't afford the whole family. They were just going to steal this one character. And I said, I'm not a thief. I'm not doing it. But give me a few days. And then I thought, sex and death. That's good. So I got trashy. We had a magazine called Bizarre in those days. And from that I got fishnet hose and black patent leather shoes with studs and long phallic nails and a long phallic cigarette holder. I did a lot of Dragon Lady. But B&D, right? Tight waist cincher and uplift bra and glamour makeup. So that's what happened, and they allowed it. Hunt, I came and showed Hunt. He said, that's fine, and we went with that. And the Vampire was born. I was paid $79 a week, $59.60 take home, midnight Saturday night. It was a very dead time slot. Well, within 3 weeks, Life magazine was there knocking, saying, hey, we want to do you. So the studio took notice. What have we got here, right? And, you know, all hell broke loose. I had fan clubs all over the world, which I don't think has ever even happened since then with a local show.
In Plan 9, Vampira is supposed to be playing Bela Lugosi's deceased wife, brought back from the dead by the invading aliens. Why Bela's wife should look like, well, Vampira, right down to the revealing black dress, is anybody's guess. But Plan 9 fans wouldn't have it any other way.
I made myself up at home, which was my custom, and then, since they couldn't afford a chauffeur for me, or as big major studios did, I went on the RTD. It was the cemetery set they had there. A sociologist or historian, no matter how gifted, probably couldn't discern scientifically why Ed Wood's film White Plan 9 from Outer Space has reached this cult status. I think it may be scientifically impossible to find a cut and dried reason. But the nearest thing to a reason, it seems to me, is that Ed Wood was one of the chosen. It was karmic. It was his destiny. Simply that, unreasonable as it may sound, it was his destiny to live this episode, right? And we, wittingly or unwittingly, are his disciples. Criswell was such a fascinating man to me. I'd like to see someone do a biography of him.
And of course, Criswell is incredible. Kelton the Cop is...
Oh, Criswell's.
His full name was Charles Jaron Criswell King, and he opens and closes Plan 9 from Outer Space with a series of uniquely delivered pronouncements about the unknown and the unbelievable, whose meanings are unknown and unbelievable.
My friend, can your heart stand the shocking facts about grave robbers from outer space?
The son of an Indiana mortician, Criswell was a canny entrepreneur who got his start as a radio newscaster in New York. He reportedly began to predict the future when asked by the station's management to pad his broadcast. Through the 50s and 60s, Criswell had his own Los Angeles TV show and a syndicated newspaper column. Both were called Criswell Predicts.
Everybody listened to Criswell, and whether you made fun of it or not, he had a following that wouldn't stop.
I don't know where in the world he got his reputation, because I don't recall a single prediction ever coming true.
Criswell claimed that 87% of his predictions were accurate, but in fact he was seldom correct. Still, no one seemed to mind much, and Criswell was often invited to guest on national talk shows.
Oh, yes. A famous psychic, but he did not believe he was psychic. I think he was, though he didn't think so himself. He thought he was a fraud. When my mother died, we were impoverished, and I didn't know how to go about doing a funeral. It was something I'd never done. And Criswell came to the fore. He said, I come from an undertaking family. And he took charge of the funeral. He got all the pallbearers, did the handshaking, he did everything.
Criswell crossed over to the land beyond in 1982. Showman to the End. His marker sports the name of his show and newspaper column. Lest the world forget.
Did you believe his predictions were sincere?
Well, I was hoping when he did predict about the grave robbers from outer space, I was hoping that would be true, which that's about the only one I knew that turned out to be finally turned out to be the right one.
What was his prediction?
That you'll be hearing about this picture in the near future.
When Ed Wood finished editing Plan 9 from Outer Space, he handed it over to producer Ed Reynolds. The finished film had gone over poorly at test screenings, but Ed Wood remained ever optimistic. While he went on to other projects, Ed Reynolds began looking for a distributor. No easy task.
The release of the film was handled by Ed Reynolds. He went to New York a few weeks later in an effort to get a distribution. He started at the very top of the production releasing companies like Paramount all the way down. He was there about 3 weeks, getting no one to handle the film. And he was staying at some hotel in New York, and his funds ran out. And they took his luggage, his suitcases. The hotel bill did until he could pay his bill. And he just ran into hard times, and his wife finally was able to send him some money from Los Angeles so he could pay his bill and get home. As I understand, some months later he was able to work out a distribution with a small company. He had to provide the release prints. And a lab, I think, made 10 or 15 release prints, but they took a lien against the film as a mortgage, as a guarantee. So he had to provide the film and the press kits and the one sheets before a company would even release it. Unfortunately, film just was not booked in too many theaters. Some small, cheap country drive-ins and a few downtown backstreet theaters. It just made no money at all. And after a while, the distributor just pulled it.
By the early 60s, Ed Wood's career was in serious decline due to the critical and commercial failure of Plan 9 and the handful of films that followed. The 70s only got worse for Wood. As they had for Bela Lugosi before him, the times passed him by.
Well, they weren't making any more B pictures. The television came in the early 60s.
Sadly, Wood's last years were marked by poor health, despondence, evictions, and heavy drinking.
He took this place on Yucca in Hollywood. He gave me the address, and I went over. And so anyway, I thought I'd go and see Ed. And when I went over there, it was just a rundown area. You know, it's derelicts around that area. You know, winos and dope addicts. And this place was it was just worse than Main Street. So anyway, and it really hurt me, you know. I said, geez, Ed, how'd he get here? You know, I couldn't believe it. So I went and visited Ed. And I think I went down there about 3-4 times to visit him. But he was always drunk. Always, you know, he was just drunk. He was out of it. He was talking about doing a movie. I said, I got a guy's interested in financing me. But I said, it's one of Ed's wild stories. But I hope for the best for the man. But really hit rock bottom. Ed had no place to go. They threw him out of that place where he was. That rent was maybe about $30 a month. He couldn't even make $30 a month. So Ed had to leave that place. And anyway, Peter Cole took him in. And he stayed with Peter Cole for about 2 or 3 weeks. and this is where Ed died in his home. And I understand that that Sunday morning, there was a football game on TV, and so anyway, I understand Ed wanted a shot of liquor. He needed a shot of liquor. But anyway, Peter was getting after him. He was kind of, you know, it was improving. He was kind of tapering off his drinking, and Peter was making him some good food. But I remember Ed said, I need a drink, I need a drink. And I think Peter did give him a drink. But then about an hour later or so, someone come to visit Peter Coe, and they wanted to see Ed Wood, and he said, well, he's in the bedroom. So when the person went there in the bedroom, then they walked out, came out of the bedroom, says, that man's dead already. So Ed Wood's gone.
Wood's ashes were scattered at sea by his wife, Kathy. There is no place to mark his passing in the world, and even the trade paper of his industry, Variety, failed to run an obituary. The end of Wood's life might well have been the end of interest in his films, but barely had Plan 9 completed its minimal 1959 theatrical release when its long, slow climb to rediscovery began. As early as 1961, it was appearing on television. When Plan 9 aired on Los Angeles TV, Ed Wood would call friends up at all hours of the night to excitedly remind them when it was running. Kids who read magazines like Famous Monsters of Filmland took Plan 9 for their own. A cult began to spring up around the film and Wood.
It was a combination of many factors, I'd say. Some of the ones you just mentioned, the Medved's books and the insatiable appetite of television for old films in the early 60s and the late 60s, actually more than the early 60s. There was also a growing cult for Bela Lugosi, who's by far more popular now for some reason than even Karloff. I think it was also partly the style of the film itself started reflecting back on the audiences. I mean, they couldn't quite believe it, what they were seeing, and the idea that they couldn't believe it made it fun. Also, it became hip to find old movies comical.
By the late 1970s, it had indeed become hip to find old movies comical. The phrase, "so bad they're good," was resurrected, and a pair of film buff brothers named Michael and Harry Medved decided to tap into that sensibility with two books, The 50 Worst Films of All Time, and its much more influential follow-up, the Golden Turkey Awards.
There's always been this underground cult of Plan 9 fanatics. I think Joe Dante was the first one really to write about it and take it seriously. When he was like 14 or 15 years old or something, he wrote this list of the worst monster movies ever made for Famous Monsters, I guess. And I had seen that list, and so I was partially inspired by that.
At the 75th birthday party for Forrest Ackerman, Famous Monsters of Filmland editor, director Joe Dante recalled the article in question.
The big thing came to me, how can I get money with Famous Monsters? This was the quest of every kid my age. And as it happened, I wrote a big long letter about a lot of movies I hadn't seen, and I had previously sent out a list of all the best movies that I had ever seen, so I sent out a list of all the worst movies that I'd ever seen. And for some reason, not only did he decide to print it, an article on that. And I remember going to the postal box and pulling out this big envelope. That was certainly one of the red letter days of all time. And then, of course, I read the article, which thank God completely rewritten. There's many words that I didn't even understand. And unfortunately, the article has come to haunt me because, in my earlier days, I thought that movies like I was a teenage werewolf were just silly. And I have come to realize that a lot of movies that I put on this list were actually movies that are really pretty good. And I actually got one.
For better or worse, Plan 9's place in popular culture is inextricably and controversially bound up with the Medved's so bad it's good philosophy. Without the Medved's attentions, Plan 9's fame would certainly be less than it is. But the downside has been that Plan 9's infamous tag of worst film of all time, attached to it not by the Medveds, but by a write-in vote from their readers, splits Plan 9 fans right down the middle to this day.
We listed it as the worst film of all time according to our readers of the 50 worst films of all time. And the underground cult became an above-ground cult.
Is Plan 9 the worst film of all time? That depends on who you ask.
I think Pink Flamingos is probably the worst movie ever made.
It's interesting all the way through, and that's more than you can say for a lot of pictures, because to me the biggest sin a film can commit is being dull. And Plan 9, whatever it is not dull.
Meryl Streep's last movie, to me, would be the worst film of all time, or any film that she's in.
Screenwriter Terry Black wrote the film Dead Heat, as well as several episodes of HBO's Tales from the Crypt. He occasionally teaches screenwriting and has made novel use of Plan 9 in his curriculum.
I'm always looking for ways to make the classroom a more dynamic experience for students to take something away from it. I've always believed that one way of learning how to write a screenplay, how to structure a story, how to put film together, is to see an example of how it's not done well. So my brainstorm is I thought, okay, we'll take Plan 9, we'll show the film in its entirety. I don't normally do that. And before I did, I instructed my students to take out pen and pencil, and I said, what I want you to do is every time you see something done badly, write it down. And at the end, after we've seen the movie, we'll go around to class and we'll count. We'll see who found the most. In order to make it fair, well, I did it myself. And so I took the liberty of bringing my list along with me here. What I found were 82 flaws with the movie. Would you like me to read this?
I mean, you go to college, you take courses in art and media, they tell you surrealism is important, existentialism is important, and then you see it right in front of your eyes in Plan 9 from Outer Space, a movie that achieves high art through sheer incompetence.
Rambling dialogue, insults to the viewer's intelligence, melodramatic music score, patronizing voiceover narration.
He would, use his two favorite words, dramatic license, let it go, good enough.
Why is it so important that you want to contact the governments of our Earth?
Because of death. Because all you of Earth are idiots. Now, you just hold on, Buster.
No, you hold on. First was your firecracker, a harmless explosive. Then your hand grenade. They began to kill your own people a few at a time. Then the bomb. Then a larger bomb. Many people are killed at one time. Then your scientists stumbled upon the atom bomb. Split the atom. Then the hydrogen bomb, where you actually explode the air itself. Now you can brings the total destruction of the entire universe served by our sun. The only explosion left is the solar night.
Why, there's no such thing.
Perhaps to you, but we've known it for centuries. Your scientists will stumble upon it as they have all the others. But the juvenile minds which you possess will not comprehend its strength until it's too late.
Lugosi's bad acting, boring shot composition, cheap set design, clumsy editing, ridiculous transitions, fake-looking plane set, dime store special effects.
So what if we do develop this solar night bomb? We'd be even a stronger nation than now.
Stronger. You see? You see? Your stupid minds. Stupid. Stupid.
That's all I'm taking from you.
Get back here, you jerk!
Do you have a particular favorite scene?
Yes, it's your stupid minds, stupid, stupid. For all the science fiction films where the superior alien calmly explains how superior he is, let's call it the Michael Rennie approach, this guy is upset and freaked out as any human being would be, and then the human response is to punch the guy out. Now, that is a scene unlike anything else in the history of science fiction cinema. It resonates.
In this sequence, Bela Lugosi's double is about to be shot. Notice how, as he neck chops Kelton the cop, his cape almost slips from his shoulders.
Absurd off-camera screams, stupid analogies, Lugosi's off-camera death, day for night transitions, Tor's delivery of lines, shot continuity, transition to fake-looking house, boring direction, cigar-shaped spacecraft that aren't.
One of Plan 9's most famous gaffes occurs in the cemetery scenes. Watch the gravestones on the right.
as a director, Ed was a man who worked off the top of his head. What he was going to do, it was whatever his impulse, his first impulse said. You do it instantly now with whatever's handy, and that's it, and don't even think of a retake. Don't even think of it.
Idiotic eulogies, ridiculous reaction shots, unrelated from nowhere stock footage, Colonel Tom Edwards' bizarre white background, dumb backstory, non sequitur dialogue, phony costumes, idiotic spaceship, logic problems, fake technology, shadows in outer space.
Here, in a sequence as economically handled as any in cinema history, Bela Lugosi dies off-screen. Notice that after the freeze frame, Lugosi's shadow is still visible on the ground.
Saucer seat over Hollywood. Flying saucers seen over Washington, D.C.
One of the most cherished of Plan 9's images are the wobbly flying saucers used with bold and unblinking authority by Ed Wood throughout the movie. No other element in Plan 9 is easier to take potshots at.
We've all seen the hubcaps flying with the nylon strings or whatever they have, fishing tackle, glinting. We can see the strings that are moving the things about.
Bobby, have you seen Plan 9 from outer space?
Yes, I saw that flying saucer. Plate, it was, right? It was a plate.
Ed Wood invented symbolic effects to take the place of special effects, that it's wrong to view his films as having bad special effects. Instead, we should say that when he wants a special effect, he puts a symbol on the screen of the special effect he would have if he had the money.
I mean, I don't see the strings. I mean, if you really look for them, maybe you can see them, but I mean, that's not what I'm looking for, and that's not what I see.
The saucers in Plan 9 were said to be everything from Cadillac hubcaps to pie tins to paper plates. It made for such a good story that even Ed Wood took to telling people he'd used hubcaps for the saucers. But Wood had given one interview in which he told the truth. What he said was this: he'd simply gone to a local hobby shop and purchased half a dozen commercially available model kits. And here it is, the only flying saucer model kit available at the time Plan 9 from outer space was made. To get his saucers to fly, Wood simply drilled 3 holes around the rim of each model, strung monofilament through the holes, and puppeted the models before various painted backdrops. Careful comparison with the film reveals that these model saucers were indeed used, and the Plan 9 companion is proud to have solved this mini-mystery once and for all.
Pointless saucer footage, witless up there, over there, in their speech, psychopathic pillow-grabbing wife, idiotic idioms, unscary zombie attack, same Lugosi footage used again and again and again. Tor can't get out of his own grave.
After I moved to Los Angeles and became a big Plan 9 fan, I decided that I had to, when I got a new car, that it had to have a Plan 9 license plate. So I went to the DMV and, thinking no one in the world would have ever heard of it, registered for Plan 9, and it came back already registered. So I had to be inventive and do Plan N9. Having a license plate that says Plan 9 gets a lot of traffic interruptions. People are always stopping and saying, "What is Plan 9? I mean, what happened to Plan 1 through 8? If I heard that another time, you just want to go, ugh." But and then you also get a lot of people that go, "Did you make Plan 9?
This is the Acker Mansion, home of Mr. Science Fiction, Forrest J. Ackerman. Seen here leading visitors on one of his regular tours of his vast collection.
Paul made this for me. It doesn't exist anywhere but here.
Best known as editor of famous monsters of filmland, Forey is also a literary agent for such authors as A.E. Van Vogt. In the very early 50s, he even tried to sell the fiction of a struggling young author named Edward D. Wood, Jr. Among the rarities from Mr. Ackerman's collection is the only known surviving piece of wardrobe from Plan 9 from outer space.
This is the cape I saw Bela Lugosi wearing in 1932 on the stage in San Francisco when he was portraying Dracula. And finally, we See it for the last time in Plan 9 from outer space. Listen to them, children of the night. What music they make. Don't be afraid. I never drink at Hollywood and wine.
Hi, welcome to Hollywood Book and Poster Company.
Hi, Eric. Let me ask you a few questions about Plan 9 collectibles. How often do you get requests for posters and stills and the like from Plan 9?
All the time. I mean, since we opened up the store in 1977, I think a day doesn't go by in which somebody doesn't call or come in asking for, anything we have on Plan 9.
What kind of items are most requested?
Well, the poster, lobby cards, photos, the movie script.
What are some of your favorite moments from it?
It's got to be just about every scene with Vampira, I think. I've always been awed and fascinated by her character. Tor Johnson, of course. I think the graveyard scenes always sort of stay in my mind. The tombstones that if you look closely, you can see them falling, popping down and popping back up.
What does a one sheet from Plan 9 sell for these days?
The last one I had went for $1,500. And that was I sold it about a year ago.
Who bought it?
It was a collector in New York, actually. Somebody that was the last poster he needed to complete his collection. So as far as I know, he has every single Edward Jr. poster.
How about a set of lobby cards from Plan 9? What do they go for?
I was told the set goes for around somewhere between $750 up to maybe $1,000. It's very rare. It's real hard to get those.
What were items like the ones we're talking about selling for, say, 10 or 15 years ago?
Probably next to nothing. I mean, I don't think it's just a lot of people weren't aware of the film, of what an amazing cult film it is. I mean, back then I think you probably could get it for next to nothing.
Maybe you can tell us what some of the reasons are for the rise in the value of paper collectibles from Plan 9 and other cult films.
Yeah, I think it has to do a lot of it with a lot of the books that have come out. A lot of the film festivals all around the country. There's like Ed Wood Jr. film retrospectives all the time, and he's gotten a lot of exposure on television, on cable. I think all those factors have to be taken into consideration.
How about the Golden Turkeys?
I question the motives of the book, but it did bring him into into being with a lot of people that ordinarily would never even have heard of him or been familiar with him. So it did turn a whole new generation onto the Ed Wood Jr. Films.
Are you a Plan 9 fan yourself?
Oh yeah, always have been, always will be.
Revolving point of view, eons of your years ago, overlong half-witted alien recording, atmospheric conditions in outer space, dopey arm-crossing aliens, Griswold plays two parts when one was too many, contrived suspense.
One of the legacies of Plan 9 from Outer Space is its oddball ripple effect through popular culture, which continues to this day. Like many a contemporary hit, Ed Wood's self-proclaimed pride and joy has inspired comics, T-shirts, masks, models, postcards, a soundtrack album, even a musical adaptation, not to mention regular retrospective screenings and a steady stream of writing about the film and its creator. It's been said of Plan 9 that it's an anti-masterpiece, that Ed Wood was an anti-genius, and that we watch Plan 9 in rapt anticipation of its next wrong move. There's room for that theory, just as there's room for the simpler theory that Ed Wood did his best to make an entertaining film and succeeded, if not exactly in all the ways he may have intended. Without question, time has been good to Plan 9. There's more than a little irony in the fact that the very qualities that made it a critical failure when it was made are the very same ones that ensure the film will never be forgotten. Of all the things written about the film, perhaps this quote sums Plan 9 up best. No matter what time it is when you watch Plan 9 from Outer Space, it always feels like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, its counterpart.
Unconvincing terror, dim-witted decomposition ray, Dicta Robitaille, which is a terribly dumb name.
I think Plan 9 has endured as a movie because, and for the same reason that Glen or Glenda has, so many framing devices that it's like a bunch of Chinese boxes. And when you finally emptied all the boxes, there's nothing there. Ed Wood always puts in narration where narration is totally unnecessary, and then surrounds the narration with more narration until finally you disappear into the thickets of commentary and you forget there was ever a storyline. It's a confidence trick. Plan 9 from Outer Space is an hour-and-a-half magic act, and there was nothing up Ed Wood's sleeves.
It's good. That's why I didn't do it.
Well, it's mainly because everyone's brain damaged, right?
I think, in a sense, he's an American success story. He got to make movies, and his name is on the screen. At the end of his movies is Made in Hollywood, USA, by God. No, I don't think he can be summed up so easily. People keep wanting to pigeonhole him, to want to find 2 or 3 words they can use as a descriptor on him. You find him in a short entry in Katz's Film Encyclopedia. Tragic-driven American filmmaker who made low-budget turkeys. Yeah, he wasn't. He was a lot more things. And a lot more complicated. He was a person.
Plan 9 is going to be 36 next year. You want to look into the camera and say happy birthday?
Happy birthday, Plan 9, and Bella, right on, man.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there should be a parade, celebrations. They should probably do, they have to be a Plan 9 or Edward Jr. Day in L.A. declared by Mayor Bradley.
Happy birthday, Plan 9. You age like fine old wine. I get that's a rhyme, isn't it?
Happy birthday, Plan 9.
Well, I was hoping when he did predict about the grave robbers from outer space, I was hoping that would be true, which that's about the only one I knew that turned out to be finally turned out to be the right one.
What was his prediction?
That you'll be hearing about this picture in the near future.
My mom is Tor Johnson's mom. He's a big boy, baldy star. Our daddy said, no son of mine.
No son of mine will have less hair nor drive a car. Doesn't brush his tooth. Thor Johnson bites the dentist.
Tor Johnson likes to pick up girls.
Tor Johnson says, my only friend is a Thanksgiving bitch. My job is stuff a turkey.
He's a big boy. Our daddy said, pass the potatoes.
Mother's Thor has eaten his bib again.
Imagine, if you will, last New Year's Eve party. Tore naked but for loincloth made of potato sack. Barbecue moonlight glistening the drop of chicken blood on his chins.
I am sneaky. Shut up, please.
Flop belly up on Chip and Dip, Tor shows his Stanislavski, scares the guests into the pool.
I says, "Boo, the guy and the girl is going in the pool. Potatoes chip, potatoes salad. Oh, wait, potatoes salad.